Thomas Paine's common sense. Thomas Paine is often called the forgotten founder. Although his writings in favor of revolution and democracy were most influential and motivating, he was not included in the constitutional conventions that formed the American government. Nonetheless, his arguments, reasoning, and passion are most worthy of remembrance. Section titled, Origin and Design of Government. In the introduction to this work, Paine attacks thinking by tradition, meaning the fallacy of thinking something correct or false merely because of its age or novelty. Paine also advertises or conceives American democracy as having the greatest historical significance. Consider these lines.
The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. Many circumstances have and will arise, which are not local, but universal, and through which the principles of all lovers of mankind are affected, and in the event of which their affections are interested.
As such, the reader feels animated or even passionate to know what will be said next. LOL. It is also commendable how the philosopher refused to make his name public, thus lending weight to the idea that he is writing with an ideal in mind, rather than personal service. In other words, that he is not a sophist out for personal glorification. To begin his inquiry, Paine declares government a necessary evil, meaning, because of humans' moral shortcomings, government is needed. Nonetheless, paradoxically, he admits that government, when improperly constituted, may be the worst of evils. Consider the lines.
When we suffer, or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer.
I should note, most of the work is filled with such common sense reasoning. LOL. The prior segues into an account of how governments were originally formed. He makes reference to the idea of a social contract, an exchange of freedom for security. Aside from the harms that others might inflict, Paine also points out that no man may survive in solitude. Humans need to make such a contract with one another for survival. He considers this as inviolable as the law of gravity. It is but the nature of man. Further, he describes how in primitive societies the government could be of absolute equality, one of direct democracy. Yet, he argues, with larger nations the need arises for representative bodies. I was most disappointed that he then did not write about random selection. Instead, he believes that popular election is the only means of selecting an allegedly representative body. At least he highlights the importance of decentralization as he speaks not only of the need for federalism, but also
having elections often, because as the elected might by that means return and mix again with the general body of electors. This frequent interchange will establish a common interest with every part of the community.
Surely this so-called mixing should be understood as a rejection of re-elections, rather as becoming a common citizen that is then affected by the laws that the representative himself formulated. I should make clear that if the representative does not return to the status of common citizen, but is ever re-elected, then he is not mixing back into society, but remaining an oligarch. I found it jocular how he stresses the importance of simplicity. I say so as, besides the rule of a single man, nothing would be simpler than political election by random selection. Therein you can remove the crevices, as the writer puts it, in which corruption and misdeeds hide and seep. Of course, many will say, one must be wary of simplicity as
the convenient and practical are the pieces that legitimize tyranny.
Either way, Paine argues that simplicity is necessary to allow the voter access to what, or who, may be causing misgovernment. In an overly complex system, the many elements may blame one another, and thus no correction ever occurs. Note, this is surely meant to be a subtle criticism of checks and balances of separate powers. This reasoning sure sounds commonsensical, but alas, I must take issue with some omissions. It is important to remember the need for appropriate education, as the most simple-minded will find the simplest problems to be too complex. Also, keep in mind that complexity is very much itself, often, a necessary evil. Frequently, only through complexity thorough deliberation and policing may occur. Subsequently, Paine speaks of the English constitutional monarchy. He explains that only a third of it is republican or democratic. The other elements are aristocratic or monarchical. This segues into a great open criticism of the idea, at least in the case of a monarchy, of check and balance. Yes, consider how he says.
The Constitution of England as a union of three powers reciprocally checking each other is farcical.
The question is, why would a body that requires to be checked need to exist? Furthermore, why should such a body then be given the power to check those who checked it in return? Surely, says Paine, the monarchy is utterly unnecessary and simply detrimental. It needs to be checked by the people, but
it again supposes that the king is wiser than those whom it has already supposed to be wiser than him. A mere absurdity.
Very commonsensical. Surely, I would not disagree. Yet, the reasoning does leave the question of whether it is appropriate for two democratic bodies to check and balance each other. Ideally, as I would have it, a randomly selected body, and then the people as a whole in plebiscite. Continuing, I rather welcomed and smiled at the reference.
A house divided against itself.
I wonder if Lincoln either learned his famed sentence from this writer, or if it was a common analogy and refrain. It is also jocular how Paine accuses the English commoners of supporting the royalty and nobility merely out of pride, out of emotion. What is worse, he says that therefore their government is not different from that of France, save for the fact that it pretends to have some democracy in it. Whether this was true or not does not invalidate the awareness of the harm that emotion provides to reason. He speaks of the importance of ridding one's mind of the influence of pride and prejudice. Very commendable reasoning. Section titled, Of Monarchy and Hereditary Succession. A very original awareness is shown as Paine does not speak of oppression or immorality as the cause of inequity. Rather, the reverse is true. He has it that oppression and immorality result from pre-established inequity. Yes, as such he conceptually introduces the great harm of nepotism. How it corrupts the formation of the human spirit. In large part, this section is about the value of meritocracy. First, kings, in their spoiled spirits, are blamed for all the wars that have ever been. Holland is praised as negative proof given that it lived in peace without a king. Most unexpectedly, the philosopher then takes issue with the ancients. He references them as heathens. It is said that from heathens the Jews adopted monarchy. This is all to say that monarchy is
the most prosperous invention the devil ever set on foot for the promotion of idolatry.
This must have been a most moving argument. The whole section will focus on the likes of kings, like all other humans, coming from dust and becoming dust, therefore not worthy of worship. Yes, Paine then goes at length with seeming quotations to prove that the Christian scriptures, in fact, speak against monarchy. The first challenge is the famed,
Give unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's.
He says that this is a legal claim. It stresses the importance of abiding the law. Yet, not that Caesar, or anyone, should be given the title or power of God or God's representative. A certain Gideon, from the Jewish myths, is highlighted as he, according to the story, is offered hereditary rule. Gideon, most commendably, refuses such a title. Yet later, his sons will not follow their father's example. The writer then draws an analogy between Adam and Eve's original sin and that of hereditary rule. What is more, consider how he says,
Man hath good reason to believe that there is as much of kingcraft as priestcraft in withholding the scripture from the public in popish countries. For monarchy in every instance is the popery of government. For all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever.
Surely, presently, it is not as moving or accepted to criticize the Vatican popery. Keep in mind that back then America was principally, truly, a Protestant nation with only small churches and parishes, no monarchical, large churches. Continuing, nature itself, says Paine, proves the folly of hereditary anything. I have thought for a long time that a word should be invented. Let me call it hereditariness. I cannot use the already existing term, hereditarianism, since modern well-educated idiots have constructed a complex series of scientific fallacies around this term in an effort to legitimize the fall of true meritocracy. Returning to the text, in my opinion, the writer echoes the wisdom of many ancient philosophers when he says that nature, more often than not, produces a donkey from a lion. LOL. Speaking of the historical formation of hereditary rule, the writer indicates that in the early past men would not have adopted such a thing, as such would have been alien to all that was then known. Although, perhaps, they might have elected kings, they would never have elected a hereditary one. That would rob future generations of their own practice. Likewise, would occur with random selection, which indicates that Paine does know about it. Shame that he did not highlight it. In my opinion, naught could be more commonsensical. Either way, the prior is to say that hereditariness is a myth invented at a time wherein most people did not know the past, or there was no record of the past. Thus was the case with none other than William the Conqueror. It is funny as Paine refers to him as a brigand.
A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally original.
Yes, thus it is with all whom claim nobility or kingship. They are but the descendants of ruffians, the progeny of the cruelest, egocentric, and personally ambitious, not truly noble in any way. Speaking of the natural harm of such inherent nepotism, he says,
Men who look upon themselves born to reign, and others to obey, soon grow insolent. Another evil which attends hereditary succession is that the throne is subject to be possessed by a minor at any age. The public becomes a prey to every miscreant who can tamper successfully with the follies either of age or infancy.
Then there is mention of all the wars that royalty has wrought upon England. Thus, monarchy is the worst, not the best, way to ensure civil unity and peace. Section titled, The Present State of American Affairs. Let it be known that Paine's writing is intended to be a call to action. Few things could be more enlivening and motivating towards a higher ideal. Yes, the ideal of democracy, independence, autonomy, and freedom. Consider these sentences.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest, and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now.
Subsequently is an explanation of how much the then colonies suffered from servitude to Britain. It is said that the colonies prosper despite, not because of England. He argues that the colonial power only sees America as a source of personal profit. Furthermore, even if Britain was the cause of America's wealth, that does not mean it should ever be so. Paine argues,
We may as well assert that because a child has thrived upon milk, that it is never to have meat.
I should make clear that the whole of this section is nearly a sermon, one with boisterous assertions and commands. Consider.
We have been long led away by ancient prejudices and made large sacrifices to superstition.
It is easy to imagine that it was indeed often read out loud in public, such as in taverns. As for whether the various colonies would have anything in common were it not for the colonizer, most astutely Paine remarks,
This is certainly a very roundabout way of proving relationship, but it is the nearest and only true way of proving enemyship.
Meaning, familiar relations are more liable to force enmities against a third party than they are to breed friendship among the relatives. Thus, always seems to be the case with the not-so-hairy monkeys. He mentions that the colonies are not in fact entirely, or even in majority, descendant from England. Rather, they are populated by the whole of Europe. What is more, the colonies cannot avoid seeing themselves, by the nature of the geography, as distinct or separate from Europe. Thus, the European continent, not any one European kingdom, is the father or mother of America. Jocularly, the point is made that otherwise the English should see themselves as French, given that Normandy previously colonized their kingdom. Curiously, the writer speaks of America as bent upon commercialism or capitalism. Clearly, this was a founding idea of the nation. Either way, this is relevant because only through freedom from England may the former colonies ever remain open to all markets and ports. In this, Paine seems to foreshadow non-interventionism. Perhaps this too should be considered a founding ideal of the nation, an ideal, perhaps as most, that is now, for the most part, forgotten. The argument then turns nearly mystical. The philosopher speaks of space, time, and even religious omens, all indicative of the need to separate from England. Consider.
The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part. Even the distance at which the Almighty hath placed England and America is a strong and natural proof that the authority of the one over the other was never the design of heaven.
There is a special focus on how America was discovered soon after the beginning of the Reformation. Thus, America was as if God's gift to those who would need a safe haven from the evil Catholic Church, LOL. The writer then deals directly with those who counsel further union with England. He says that these are
interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain set of moderate men who think better of the European world than it deserves.
These compromisers, as he terms them in other writings, are considered the worst of the lot. The evil amounts to the harm of false hope. Reference is made to the Boston Massacre, while the reader is implored not to hope for any sort of amiability from the English. The reader is asked to consider if it were his children or wife that were killed and are hunted by the English. Let me quote.
If you have, and still can shake hands with the murderers, then you are unworthy of the name of husband, father, friend, or lover. And whatever may be your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant.
Like I said, not so much a philosophical treatise as much as a call to arms. What propaganda used to be? One that requires humans that truly know how to read, or at least understand complex sentences. Alas, thus no longer seems efficacious among most humans. The poet John Milton is quoted. The argument is that a small island cannot, naturally, rule a whole continent. Likewise, that delay is merely prolonging the suffering and cursing future generations with a harsher task. Finally, that the king is jealous, and the jealous should never hold power over those they envy. What is more, the participants are counseled not to settle for a meager change of the law. They must only be satisfied with a whole new constitution and system. Switching topic to how to form a new nation and what that nation's constitution should be like, Paine first says that the whole will naturally be united as not only are the colonies already sufficiently equal to one another, but also wars are rare for democracies. In the prior there is reference to peaceful Holland and Switzerland. Of course, Holland was then already a nearly modern system, and Switzerland continues to be the only thing close to a real democracy. Of the benefits of political equality, Paine says,
where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation.
It is said that the nation's Congress should be portioned out by districts of the colonies, the whole number of representatives being at least 390. That by random selection the states take turns nominating the prime minister. It is essential that there be yearly elections, by the way. Once again, the whole is contextualized under religion, such that he who is against a democratic republic is a servant of the devil, LOL. I will skip some of this topic because it is written in rather vague terms. There are quotations of some text I am not familiar with. The writer references it as simply the Dragonetti. I believe this is the writer of a treatise on morality. Either way, to finish this section, simply, let me quote the ending as it is so enlivening.
O ye that love mankind, ye that dare oppose, not only the tyranny, but the tyrant, stand forth. Every spot of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom hath been hunted round the globe. Asia and Africa have long expelled her. Europe regards her like a stranger, and England hath given her warning to depart. Ooh. Receive the fugitive and prepare in time an asylum for mankind.
Section titled, Of the Present Ability of America. In the last section of this treatise, Paine describes the potential of America of the New World. As might be expected, he speaks of the immense size and therefore raw resources of the continent. Curiously, this leads him to insist, profusely, that a free America may easily overcome Britain's naval power. The latter claim is based on America's seemingly infinite wood supply and England's exaggeratedly dispersed overseas territories. Although there are several other mentions concerning how each nation would match up in a military conflict, let me skip ahead. There are references to the importance of freedom of religion. Consider the lines.
It is the will of the Almighty that there should be diversity of religious opinions among us. It affords a larger field for our Christian kindness. Were we all of one way of thinking, our religious dispositions would want matter for probation.
I like this notion so much that I feel compelled to make it into an aphorism. Consider.
If there were only one religion, there would be no way of proving either the commendable mercy or the awing superiority of your own religion.
That is some real common sense thinking, LOL. Likewise, Paine speaks of expanding the vote as much as possible. Alas, this element is forgotten by many present-day Americans. Consider the lines.
A small number of electors, or a small number of representatives, are equally dangerous. But if the number of the representatives be not only small, but unequal, the danger is increased.
He uses as an example what existed in the colonial governments, where few were allowed to vote and hold elected office. Presently, we may use as an example third world countries, nations with little democracy and few real citizens. Most remarkably, he also questions
whether representation and election is not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess.
I understand this as wishing something more similar to the ancient Roman Republic. Therein, the representatives were limited to suggesting decisions the people approved or rejected by way of plebiscite. He ends this work by systematically outlining the main reasons why revolution is necessary. Most remarkable of these reasons is the idea that blood for compromise, fighting for methodological steps, is worse than wasteful delay. It is in fact harmful to full accomplishment. Thomas Paine has many other writings. On this channel you may learn more about him and many other authors. Since I always end my videos with at least one aphorism I crafted as I read the text, let me gift you 5 more.
It is not possessions, but attachments that make the heart timorous.
Avoiding responsibility for the deeds of others, people invented personal responsibility.
Greed is not enough to propel the world, for as soon as the greedy has triumphed, greed turns to cowardice and anxiety.
If God approved inheritance, he would have made motivation and will power, like he did appearance and ability.
Although knowledge engenders prudence, it is not ignorance, but arrogance, that makes the spirit reckless.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.